Welcome to the Rubenstein School at the University of Vermont. What we're going to talk about mostly today is the Aiken Center, which is our main building for administration and kind of the headquarters of the Rubenstein School. We have a few different activities related to research and building sustainability. Particularly today, I guess I'm going to talk about the green roof. And we're now fortunate to be a LEED Platinum building, which is the highest level for leadership in energy and environmental design, kind of green building standard system. So one of the activities with this building is we're not done now that we've reached LEED Platinum. We keep advancing the design of the building and materials. So we're trying to figure out ways of substituting stormwater for non-potable water use. That activity involves diverting stormwater into an existing gray water system in the building so that we can use stormwater to flush toilets and other non-potable water uses. So welcome to the green roof on the Aiken Center. It's actually 8 separate green roofs. So this is designed as a research project where we've imposed 4 different treatments of different plants and soil types, and one of those is also a control treatment. But if you look, when we start walking around, you'll notice that there's 8 separately drained watersheds up here.
The area of land that drains to a common point or common water body, in the case of Lake Champlain, or any of the tributaries that drain to Lake Champlain, or any tributary or lake anywhere. Everyone lives in a watershed.
So one of the things that we found to be quite interesting was how do we design this study so that we can maximize the amount of valuable information that we get out of it. So there's actually about 875 2-foot wide by 4-foot long flats of plants that were grown elsewhere and shipped here on a semi-truck, lifted up onto the roof with a huge crane. And then we actually randomly assign the treatments, as you should do in science, to the different treatment locations or the different watersheds. We actually have 8 separately drained watersheds up here. So that gives us an opportunity to learn more about the impact of different foliage, different plant types, different soil types on the ability to retain stormwater or to manage unwanted nutrients that we don't want to go into stormwater. So I'll now tell you briefly about the 4 different treatments. First, and perhaps some scientists would claim to be the most important treatment that we all add to scientific studies, is controls. So we have 2 randomly selected watersheds up here that don't have any vegetation on it. So that's the way this roof would perform without a green roof. So that's an important comparison to the performance of the other treatments. And the other 3 treatments, one of them is what we talk to providers of green roof plant material, and we ask them what plants and what soil would you suggest would be valuable in Burlington, Vermont area. And they designed 6 or 7 different species, mostly sedum plants species. And that's one treatment. So 2 of the watersheds up here have what we call standard plants and standard soil. It's actually watershed 7, which is one of the standard plants, standard soil watersheds. So that goes all the way up there around. And as you probably could figure out, is each one of these watersheds is not the same size. So they're all different sizes here because we had to work with the existing rooftop. So we've had to, as you might expect, is to standardize all the data. So all the data that we get out of here is expressed as a discharge per square meter type. The next thing we decided to do was let's see if we can select a different set of plants that might outperform the standard plants. So we had people at the university and a class that I teach every year, and we researched different plants that might transpire water faster and thus allow the soil to dry out quicker and be ready to absorb the next storm. So that we call our alternative plants treatment. So there's 2 watersheds up here that have a different set of plants, the same exact soil. so that when we make conclusions about that data that comes from those watersheds, we can be sure that it's due to the fact that there are different plants. Okay, so this is the alternative plants, and as I mentioned earlier, this started out with a whole different set of plants that did not perform well enough to survive, and then seeded in were most of these sedum plants that came from another treatment, which is kind of interesting to see that now it's functioning well, maybe even better than some of the other treatments, because the plants that evolved in it or kind of grew in it were the best competitors. They didn't start there, they had to compete for that space. The next treatment I'll describe is we altered the soil. So we kept the plant standard, and then we added what we call biochar to the soil, which is basically a carbon-based byproduct of burning organic matter at really high temperatures. So the theory is that biochar should allow, if you add it to a soil, it should allow that soil to absorb more water, thus reducing stormwater discharge, and it's supposed to sequester more nitrogen compounds and phosphorus compounds. So we had the last treatment, we call it a alternative soil, and that's the biochar treatment. Okay, I just wanted to point out this is an example of one of the two biochar watersheds. This is watershed 8. So everything from this line all the way over to the edge of the wall drains into the drain for watershed 8. About the data that we get from this, we have to be assured of any water that hits here or any snow that melts in each one of the watersheds drains properly, so that we know that moisture, that precipitation was from that watershed. So it's a little easier to see in this control watershed. So each watershed is shaped in such a way that it drains to a single drain. And then in a few minutes I'll talk more about where that drain gets monitored from. So there's actually 8 drains up here, one from each of the 8 watersheds. So as I mentioned up on the green roof when we were talking about the precipitation monitoring system with a little tipping bucket in it, these are actually the tipping buckets that monitor each of the 8 watersheds. So all the water leaving a watershed, as I explained on the roof, goes to a single drain, and that single drain goes to the appropriate tipping buckets. We have 8 tipping buckets, one for each watershed. We can take water out of there and measure it for the nutrients that we think are important, like nitrogen, phosphorus, anything we want to be aware of what's going into stormwater, so that we can determine the impact of the 4 different treatments that we have on the roof on not only water volume, how much is sequestered in that soil and plants, but also water quality. And in my class in particular, students work up here where they'll document species of plants that are here, and they'll work with the data from this discharge of the watersheds, which is really important. And about 5 or 6 years ago, I had a student that came up and started looking at the different plants here, and there's kind of 2 major things we noticed. One was for that alternative plant treatment that I talked about, where we chose a different set of plants, it generally failed. But the good thing is, because we have other treatments in close proximity, sedum actually seeded in to that area. So if you see that far watershed there, that was full of alternative plants, and now it's almost entirely full of the same sedum species that are performing well in the control treatments, which was kind of neat to be able to figure out. One other little thing that was interesting is this is actually the alternative soil treatment right here. So this has 10% by volume of biochar in it. And one thing we noticed when we were identifying plant species, it's a little hard to see now because they're not flowering, but these little small flower stalks that you see on here are from a plant that did not exist up here at all, wasn't in any of the treatments, and we noticed it started coming in only in the biochar treatment. So we started thinking about what does that mean? And the only thing we could come up with was the biochar must provide some type of change in the soil that allows this plant that probably blew in, or maybe it came in from a bird or something, but it allows this plant to survive and compete pretty well in these treatments. Student help in this project has been tremendous. That's not only helped me to gather data, but helped them in learning more about sustainable building practices. And a couple of the things that they've done, one is they've mapped out the presence of the different species, because every single one of these flats for that treatment had the exact same number initially put in of each of the 6 or 7 different plant species. So we know they all started the same. So if they're different now, that's due to the treatment or some other aspect of change. We do have to fertilize up here. You're supposed to do it a couple times a year. We try not to do it that often because we're trying to measure nutrients leaving, so we don't want to exceed the capacity to sequester those nutrients. Probably one of the most important things that students help me with is the discharge coming from the different watersheds. So we measure the exact amount of water leaving these watersheds every 5 minutes. Okay, and we also do, and I'll explain this a little more later, we also do water samples so that we can measure the amount of phosphorus leaving, the amount of nitrogen compounds leaving, and then amazingly, we found compounds in here. This was kind of a really interesting project for students. We found some compounds that don't come in atmospherically and are not present in any of the plants or the soil. So that was our charge to the students, is tell me how they got here. And so I don't know if you want me to answer that? Okay. So what we came up with some various experiments that the students designed was, I can't remember what the compound was. It might have been cadmium. It was a heavy metal that was coming in. But what we surmised was, with acid rain actually leach the compounds off of these galvanized fence system that surrounds the place. And I asked the students, so you got to design something that documents that. So they developed an artificial acid rain with the proper pH and other components, and they literally hung receptacles under these fencing systems, and they sprayed the acid rain on it. They sprayed another one just measuring the acid rain, and they compared the amount of cadmium or whatever the heavy metal was that came out. And I think probably the most important thing that we've learned from this is that fact that I mentioned earlier, that more than 50% of the stormwater leaving this roof is retained by the green roof. And this is only 10 centimeters, about 4 inches thick. So if we could have put a 6-inch thick roof on here, we probably would have retained 70% of it. And another really important aspect of stormwater management, not only the amount or the volume of stormwater leaving an area, but it's also the flow rate. So it's really important for us to reduce the peak of that flow rate, because that peak causes problems such as erosion in nearby streams. But in Burlington area in particular, because they have what's called a one-pipe system, where a lot of the stormwater goes into the same pipe as the sewer drain water. And so if you have a big storm, it overwhelms the sewer treatment system, and they actually have to discharge raw sewage into the lake during those times with those high peak flows. But if we can reduce that peak flow, that means there's less time that they have to discharge untreated materials, and therefore it has a less of a negative impact on water quality in Lake Champlain. We have a full meteorological station that allows us to measure things like temperature, wind speed, moisture, snow level, radiation levels for sunlight, and other parameters like that. Another attribute of green roofs, I think we're going to talk today mostly about stormwater management and the impacts of green roofs on stormwater management. But there are other benefits too. One of them is it actually provides insulation. So we've got 56 thermocouples up here measuring the temperature at 1 meter in height, temperature in the vegetation, temperature in the soil, and temperature below the flats of plants, so that we can document the impact of the green roof on keeping the building cooler in the summer and warmer in the winter.